One person who has been paying close attention to the Chauvin verdict and understands firsthand the complexities of racial profiling and police relations right here in Canada is former RCMP Staff Sergeant Alain Babineau. Alain, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So tell us how you felt when you heard the verdict.
Um, you know, it was very pleased with the results. I was somewhat surprised. I got to be honest with you because
Mhm.
it's not easy to, particularly on all three counts. You got a guilty verdict on all three counts, and that's not easy to obtain from the prosecution. Not only that, but I mean against a police officer, it's even worse because of the because of the authorities that police officers have to use lethal force and to use force generally speaking, but also lethal force. So I was surprised, but I was pleased.
Mm. Many Canadians pass this off as an American problem when I'm talking about, especially police relations when it comes to the Black community. How does the verdict impact Canadian policing, you think?
Well, everything that happens in the United States, we impacts Canada one way or the other. It doesn't matter if it's police relations, whether it be sports, whether it be or entertainment. I mean, we're all very much. I mean, we live next to the borders, and obviously I would say a large majority of Black population here in this country have been following this trial very closely. So obviously the results, and folks have been talking very candidly about them being very proud and very happy with the results, and so i think I think going forward, I mean it's probably too early to tell how much what the impact of the results of the verdict will be on policing in this country, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we, meaning law enforcement and the government, will get ahead of the curve.
Mm.
Okay, so because we have a tendency to believe sometimes that this is an American problem, and we don't, we're not racist. We don't have any, race issues here are pretty good, and that's just an American thing. But that's very far from the truth.
Yeah. What does police reform look like in this country, you think?
Well, you know what? I mean, I'm going to be police reform. Like, we've been talking about police reform for a number of years, and so well, obviously since the George Floyd killing last summer, there've been a great deal of talk about mental health issues,
Mhm.
de-escalation techniques, uh, you know, uh, all of that. But I think this is a watershed moment and an opportunity for the federal government to really take a leadership role here, because policing is a dual responsibility, constitutional dual responsibility between the federal government and the provinces, right? And so, much the same way that we're seeing the federal government right now, showing leadership in the COVID-19 crisis, right? Because got to remember also that health is also a provincial jurisdiction, where you need that kind of coordinated federal involvement. I'm looking for the same type of leadership with respect to policing reforms, starting with a federal law prohibiting racial profiling by all police services in this country. And we haven't seen that yet. So I started a petition. Just for the sake of full disclosure here, I'm going to tell you, I submitted a petition last week to the House of Commons through the regular process, so that we have a minister of public safety that will request and for the enactment of a federal law prohibiting racial profiling. And how it would work, it would not force, but it would require police services that are looking for federal funding for instance, guns and gangs, or organized crime, or other type of federal funding, to have a clear policy to how they're going to combat racial profiling within their police service, right? So in order to qualify for the grants, they'll have those policies in place, because we know all too well that when there are those initiatives, for instance, guns and gangs, or war on drugs, or organized crime, street gangs, and all that kind of stuff, is that we have collateral damage, and the communities that have suffered collateral damage are unfortunately far too often mainly Black communities right across this country, and Indigenous communities as well. And so we need to have that leadership from the federal government, and that's what I'm calling on.
Okay, so many questions coming out of that. My first question first is accountability. And so, we hear from Brenda Lucky, head of the RCMP, that she didn't believe that there was systemic racism within her organization. As you're lobbying for this bill, how about just accountability from the senior positions that there is a problem?
That's part of that. That's part of that as well, because the bill, the law would require federal agencies to also, have very robust policies in place within their own police department with respect to racial profiling training, not on diversity and inclusion, because the default look, the default approach from police services historically have been threefold: diversity and inclusion training, more community relation, and that usually translates into basketball teams and playing soccer with the young kids and all of that, and lastly having some more training, but training would be diversity and inclusion. And so or no, the third one would be more visible minorities officers. Well, those things have not worked. Okay, there's nothing wrong with having more Black cops or visible minority police officers. I mean, we encourage that because everybody should get an opportunity to get a good profession, right? To be accepted, and we should also be reflective of the population that we serve, and so there's nothing wrong with that. But with respect to community relation, you can't be having playing soccer with the kids. Police officers playing soccer with the kids on a Saturday afternoon, and then your teammates or your partners in the evening going to be racially profiling the same kids that you played soccer with, or one of the coaches on his way home gets racially profiled. No, that don't work. That's counterproductive. And lastly, we can't be teaching the communities how policing work. I mean, that's one thing, but we also need to understand the plight and the reality of those communities, and so that there's transformation that also has to take place within the police service, and we haven't seen that kind of equal partnership yet. So that's called leadership.
Yeah. And all sides coming to the table. I guess the other question is, in light of the conversation that was circulating last year about defunding the police, and obviously that's an old conversation that keeps popping up time and time again. The conversation has kind of evolved to, are police responsible for too much? We saw a failure on so many wellness calls just last year, both Black victims as well as Indigenous victims, when it came to the police really fumbling the ball when it came to how to deal with wellness calls well. Are we expecting too much of our police?
Of course. I mean, when you're asking police officers to be jack of all trades and master of none, and that's a recipe for disaster. I mean, every time somebody doesn't know what to do, they pick up the phone, call the police, and so it's impossible. Plus, you can't be trained on everything. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we're expecting a whole lot from the police. You don't have a proper training, you have a proper background, and three things that shouldn't be handled by the police. Number one, mental health, like non-criminal mental health issues. Okay, that's number one. And number two, substance addiction issues. Non-criminal, non-threatening. And number three, poverty, homelessness, poverty. That had nothing to do with policing. So we've got to put money into those organizations, money and staffing and all of that, into those organizations that are equipped, trained, expected to deal with those social issues. And yeah, police officers are social workers because, crime is a social issue, right? And so in the sense they are social workers, but at the same time, everybody's got their own, uh, uh, um, responsibilities, and but they should be working in cohesion and together. But we asking too much from policing, and you got to be careful. I mean, this whole defund thing. Uh, First of all, it's I was going to quote Obama for a minute. But you got to be careful with snappy slogan because you might not get cooperation from the people you're trying to convince to get on board. So you put people's back up against the wall. Historically, that hasn't moved very well for us. Okay, that hasn't moved very well for us because we mean black folks end up getting a short end of the stick. So you got to be very careful with the type of language that you utilize. It's all fine and dandy, and I'm not, I mean, I have nothing with academics. I mean, I've got a couple of degrees myself. I have no issues with that. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that we don't hurt the very people that we're professing to want to help.
Mm.
Are you with me? So
Absolutely.
we really got to be careful with the language, but definitely those agencies that are specifically trained and dedicated to deal with those social ills of society should be well funded and staffed and yes.
The Ontario Human Rights Commission had released a report you're probably aware of on the Toronto Police Service last year, stating that while Black people represent only 8.8% of Toronto's population, Black people represented almost one third, 32% of all the charges in the charge data set, while white people and other racialized groups were underrepresented. And we saw that kind of represented in so many stats throughout this report. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot of data when it comes to our country nationally when we're talking about the relationship between police and specifically Black and Indigenous groups and communities. When we hear these stark realities, when we hear the statistics of just the tension between the two groups, what are you, as you're talking about racial profiling and you're representing the police and speaking to the police, and again, your experience, what needs to happen? And I know you talk about the bill, but fundamentally, there is it's a broken system. Some would say it's not even a system that was created for Black and brown people. How do we try to fix the system? Again, you're talking about community and you're talking about communication, but it seems so much deeper than that.
Of course. Of course, no, it's much deeper because this is a social problem. This is a societal issue, right? Racism, discrimination, stereotypes, all of that stuff. And we could talk for a couple hours, but all racial profiling, it's all based on stereotypes, and those stereotypes regarding Black people. Um, Criminalities and you name it. I mean, we could go on and on and on and on. Well, stereotypes are well entrenched in society at large. This has
Mhm.
nothing to do with policing. This is society at large, and that have developed over time, that have been part of a well orchestrated media production, if you will, through movies, through news, through all kinds of different things, that over time it's developed in the minds of people in society from which the police come from. Police officers are not parachuted from somewhere, some other world that didn't become police officers. They're the product of society from where they come from. So those stereotypes are well entrenched, and if you've been trained mentally since the time you started attending kindergarten that Black people are dangerous, and then you go home, you watch movies and you watch cowboys and Indians, and you see Indians, you see indigenous people are being a certain type of people, and then you have that, and then you watch a gangster movie, and then you see Black folks acting the fools and acting like they're gangsters, they're criminals, and the police are the good guys, and then you want to become a cop, and then you get out on the street, and the first people that you see of black people that looked like the people you were watching on the movie last night. So you're going to be acting out those things that you've been conditioned into for years. So we have to address the issue at three level, right? Micro level. That means that there has to be a good system of complaints. There has to be, civil litigation. It has to be, for to make sure that we deter these behavior and we punish them as required. Then there has to be a meso approach, which is basically internally. How do we change some of the laws that are in place? How do we change the policies? What do we need to do? Like I propose a federal law, right? That's a meso approach. But then there's the macro approach, and that comes through when you send your kid, to kindergarten. They're going to start learning about black people and indigenous people are being respectable people, are being contributing citizens of this society, to the history. And so by the time they become police officers or journalists or judges and whatnot, they will look that they won't make no difference. Yeah, if somebody is black, and that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that because everybody's got, but at the same time, they're all contributing members of society. And so there's three levels that needs to be approached. One is quickly, one takes a little longer. The one that your kids will hopefully benefit from, but I'll be long gone before that. Those societal changes will take place.
I might be long gone, but before those are changed as well.
But the first ones are quicker fix. Mm-hmm.
My last question, Alain, is you are a black man and you have been very vocal about the experiences that you've had, the racism that you've experienced, both being a part of the RCMP. You've talked in several interviews about your son being handcuffed coming out of a movie theater. How does this personally impact you as a black man?
Well, that's why I'm passionate about this, because we need to do constructive things. Listen, I haven't spoken to a victim of racial profiling yet that has told me that they want to abolish the police. I have never met one of them. I have never spoken to a victim of racial profiling who wants to defund the police, take the police away from their neighborhood. None of that. I haven't talked to to a victim of racial profiling who says, I don't want no body cameras. I don't want them to. No, they want body cameras because they want to show the court that what the police officer did. And I haven't talked to a community yet. I recently was invited to a particular community here in Montreal because they had concern with the increase in gun violence in their communities and some of the youth that are getting access to guns and what to do. And this is an emergency meeting. And I suggested to them that we need to get on board with the police to help them track down those guns and take them off the street. Because if we don't do that, then all of our kids become potential targets because, they all look the same to the police officer. It doesn't matter. They're all black. And so we need to get on board. But also that particular community, they said, look, we don't want the police to go away. We want them on the street, but we don't want to be oppressed. So we want repression of criminality, but without the oppression of our community. Okay, so that's very important. And again, you hear a lot of, and I don't want to get into a war of ideology here, but again, some of the folks that are crying or yelling the loudest to abolish police and stuff like that haven't really felt the brunt of what it means to be face to face with a police officer and be and then taking the initiative to challenge that and to take it to court and to fight and to become victors. Those are the people that are saying, no, I want body cameras. I want to show the court the evidence that I have. And so we just got to be careful with the wording because, but I really encourage people to not fall into the victimhood paradigm, but rather to become victors. Really, that's the key word, is victors. We need to come out victorious at the end, and for me, as because I love the profession, And so I think it's a great profession, and it wasn't designed, contrary to some beliefs that, slave catchers and all of that. But they fundamentally, there was some notion that the police were there to preserve the status quo of the rich, okay, and the social elite. And I get that. But we are in the 21st century, and we need to have a 21st century type of mentality in terms of policing. And we need to reimagine what it should look like and what it should be like, and insist that it happens because you pay taxes. I sure do, and I want to make sure that I get the services that I'm paying for, and just like white communities, Italian community, other communities have organized crime, have criminalities, but their whole community doesn't get painted and racially profiled or ethnically profiled. So we're just looking for the same thing.
Serve and protect all of us. Alain Babineau,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a good one.